Hello everyone, William Tafstan over here, and welcome to the newest series on my YouTube channel, the U.S. Constitution Explained. Let's get right into it. Over multiple centuries, the New World was colonized by the European great powers, and of course this involved the 13 colonies, which was colonized by the British. Through many events that are not covered here, those colonies would eventually declare their independence and would form the United States of America. While before the independence, a couple attempts for a centralized colonial government did exist, it wouldn't be until 1777 that all the colonies would finally be united under one true federal government, and even then, it wouldn't be until 1789 that our modern constitution exists. So we're going to delve into the pre-constitutions as they provide key context on the how and why of our modern constitution. So let's get into it, and we're going to start off with the Albany Plan.
Get on a raft with Taft.
As far back as 1754, an idea floated around known as the Albany Plan, and it was written by 48-year-old Benjamin Franklin. The idea was to create a unified government for the loyal colonies, with the main factor behind it being able to coordinate a better defense against the French and the Native Americans. While this idea did fizzle out and didn't really turn into anything, this was one of the first attempts to unify the colonies under one central government. It has some familiar ideas to us, such as a president general, except theirs would be implemented by the crown, and a council of delegates based on the population of the colonies, yet each state would only have one vote. So you can see the elements of the president being the commander in chief, and already a balance between individual states' voting powers and their populations.
Get on a raft with Taft.
As tensions were boiling between the 13 colonies and the Crown, some began to plan separation in secret while others attempted to fix the issue. In 1774, famous loyalist Joseph Galloway would put forward a plan called Galloway's Plan of Union. The plan was incredibly similar to the Albany Plan with a couple of differences. The President General idea stays the same, in charge of the local military, and was responsible for enforcing the legislation. Delegates would be appointed by the colonial assemblies, similar to how the Senate would eventually be picked. This group of delegates would also have a speaker position. The biggest difference is that while the Albany Plan was focused on the military needs of the colonies, Galloway's plan also allowed the American Parliament, as it would have been called, to have a voice on trade and taxation issues in the UK government. With the whole no representation, no taxation thing, this was Galloway's plan to fix that. So Galloway's plan was the Loyalists' real last attempt to prevent the Revolutionary War. However, Galloway's plans ended up failing 6-5. This was mainly due to the Suffolk resolves in Massachusetts. The British were taking further control over the Massachusetts colony, revoking much of the rights that they had previously were enjoying. And many Massachusetts counties would end up protesting and not allowing the British to use their courts for anything really. Paul Revere would end up bringing news of said resolves to the Congress, and that gave the separatists more momentum in ending Galloway's plan, and the rest is history.
Get on a raft with Taft.
From the moment of the Declaration of Independence, the Founding Fathers knew that a government was needed in order to be seen as a legitimate government rather than a bunch of rebels, as European nations would not do business with rebels, but they would do business with a newly created government. Debate on the first government started basically at the same time we declared independence and would finish around November 15, 1777. Afterwards, the states would have to ratify the Articles of Confederation, as they were called. On June 11, 1776, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston were assigned to write the Declaration of Independence. The very next day, June 12, 1776, 13 representatives, one from each state, was assigned to prepare a draft constitution. These are the gentlemen who were in charge of writing that, and John Dickerson of Pennsylvania was the chairman of said committee. Dickerson is noted as being against sending the Declaration of Independence at the time, while he was writing the Articles of Confederation. He preferred to secure alliances beforehand, and he never ended up signing the Declaration of Independence. Anyway, it took little more than a year's worth of debate before the final draft was made, and the biggest debates were mostly on state sovereignty, the exact powers of the Congress, yes or no on a judiciary branch, the Western land claims, and the voting procedures. And now we're going on to a list of all the articles. Here we go. All right, so we're going to run through the Articles of Confederation real quick. The articles did contain a preamble, 13 articles, a conclusion, and a signatory area. But we're just going to be focusing on the articles themselves, and these are, I'm going to be speaking very abbreviated versions of said articles. I'll put the full ones up on the screen. Article number 1 was named the Confederacy, the United States of America. Article number 2, each state is free and independent in its sovereignty, except for what is outlined in the later articles. Article 3, the Confederation is so the states are allied for a common defense, mutual and general welfare, and are united on the fronts if they are attacked on religion, sovereignty, trade, or any other pretense. Article 4, all individuals are to be treated equally between the states, and a freedom of movement is established, along with extradition treaties between all the states. Article 5, the Congress of the Confederation grants one vote per state. Each state has multiple delegates assigned by population size. Members of the Congress are appointed by the state legislators, and term limits did exist. Article 6. Only the central government can declare war or do any foreign policies. No states can interfere or undermine the central government's foreign policies. Also, each state cannot maintain a standing army or navy unless pirates are attacking them, but each state is required to keep a militia. Article 7. State legislators assign military ranks of colonel and below. Article 8. The United States of America's expenses will be paid with funds raised by the state legislators and will be portioned by the property value of the states. Article 9. Congress can do anything foreign policy related, appoint courts for pirates, no congressman can be a judge, and Congress itself is the final court for disputes between states. The courts is composed by the Congress. Congress regulates post office and appoints officers and regulates the Army. Congress can demand payments or supplies from states in portion of the states. Congress cannot declare war or enter treaties with 9 states agreeing. Article 10. When Congress is in recess, the powers of Congress can be executed by the Committee of the States. Article 11. Canada can join if they want to. Article 12. The Confederation will honor all debts and credits pre-Articles of Confederation. Article 13. The Articles will exist and be in usage and can only be changed if Congress and the states ratify said change. Now we can see some familiar ideas in the Articles that were received from the earlier plans and some that would live on in the Constitution. Things such as obviously the name of the country, what would eventually become the 10th Amendment, equal freedom of movement. Each state has an equal vote, although in a different manner than what we would be familiar to. The federal government is in charge of foreign affairs, Congress is in charge of post offices, and whatnot. By 1781, all 13 states ratified the new Constitution, the very first state being Virginia, and the last holdout being Maryland. Although once Virginia first voted to ratify the Articles, it was the de facto law during the 2 years when it wasn't technically ratified. But for those of you who are keeping track at home, you may notice that we no longer follow the Articles of Confederation, so we're now going to go discuss the flaws and the fall of the Articles.
Get on a raft with Taft.
The Articles were not perfect. Almost immediately cracks began showing, with the colonies fighting a war and with the newly created federal government it was unable to compel states for troops or for funding, leaving the military shorthanded and occasionally on the brink of disbandment during the Revolutionary War, which is ironic considering that the Articles were created to allow a centralized war government. Another example was that the pre-Articles Congress promised soldiers a pension of half pay for their entire lives. Yet, the Congress lacked any way to actually gather the funds. All they could do was politely ask the states for the money. One of the boiling points was the Newburgh's conspiracy, which almost led some military members to, quote, walk on Congress. Their intentions aren't exactly known, but Washington would calm them down and secure their payment. There were also riots in Philadelphia based on the lack of veterans' pay, which would actually force the Congress to leave Philadelphia for the time being. This all came down to the fact that the Congress could make promises and decisions, but lacked any real way to enforce it. Congress had no way to gather taxes, and as stated earlier, really could only ask the states for money. This led to the Congress printing money in order to pay for what they could, further depreciating the continental dollar, to the point that the continental dollar really became a joke currency and was basically out of use within a few years. The Congress continued to struggle to do any real business. The Treaty of Paris, which would end the Revolutionary War and secure America's freedom, actually floated around in the Congress for months because too few delegates were present to ratify it for months. Apparently, rarely did more than half of the delegates show up. Thomas Jefferson would write to James Monroe in response to the fact that no navy could be funded that, quote, it will be said there is no money in the Treasury. There will never be money in the Treasury till the Confederacy shows its teeth. Basically stating that there is no money there and the Confederacy, the federal government itself, could not gather any money unless it could use force, which, as of the Articles of Confederation, it could not. The U.S. would also never ratify a treaty based around the Mississippi River. Here it is on screen, I can't read it. And the Congress could not even compel the British to leave forts that were on American soil, even after the Treaty of Paris was signed, because they lacked the funds and the ability to move troops to tell them to leave, essentially. And this would all eventually compound and force the United States to change form of government, kind of.
Get on a raft with Taft.
As in the previous section, the Articles failed to unify the state and embarrass the nation on foreign affairs. It was simply unable to act productively. It also failed to keep the soldiers paid. Many of the prominent national leaders retired from public life and would hold minor state jobs. That, along with most people being fine with their local leaders, led to the further inability of the Congress to actually act. John Adams would see the failures of the federal government firsthand while in London as a U.S. representative. As Adams, and by extent the federal government, could not promise the states would follow any treaty made by them, the British basically refused to work with them. Adams and Congress, of course, wanted to gain the power to enforce the trade deals, but they realistically couldn't get it working in practice, leading to a political split between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, locked in a battle on how to balance the state rights and powers and the federal government powers. The thought of replacing the Articles had already had support nearly the minute they passed. It wasn't until Hamilton, along with Washington's endorsement in 1787, that it became a real conversation. While on paper the meetings in 1778 were to revise the Articles, it was a kind of secret that some delegates were just making a new constitution. And one of the last hurdles they had to overcome was that Article 13 and Article 10 contradicted each other. Article 10 suggested that only 9 states were needed to ratify if Congress wasn't in session, while Article 13 stated that all states and Congress were needed to ratify. It was eventually decided that Article 10 was correct and only 9 states were needed to ratify, and the Articles would limp away Saturday, September 13th, 1788, and the new Constitution would be implemented. Thank you all for watching, and while we didn't cover any of the Constitution this episode, but the governments that came before our modern Constitution, it is just as important as understanding the Constitution as it would be to read the actual texts. On the next episode or two, depending on length, we're going to be discussing the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers, and that'll give us a really clear idea on the thought process behind the Constitution and why certain rules were created. Anyway, if you like the episode, please like, subscribe, and share, and thank you all. Have a wonderful day.
The time has come, the fight is on. We've picked the man to run. For president, Ohio sent her noble, worthy son. The man we need, the man to lead our strong and mighty craft. Through storm at sea, to victory, it's William Howard Taft.